Arizona, 1.7 million people have now voted early. Republican registrations lead Dems in that state. So now you have the basic facts as I've been giving you every night if you tune into the beat here. As we head into the final weekend before this election, there are some other clear signals. Beyond the early turnout that's rising overall, which just shows you participation, there is a pattern on gender. And I'm going to tell you up front here why the Harris campaign is encouraged, or, as the phrase goes, cautiously optimistic for them. Women, as you may know, typically vote Democratic. The 2020 election, which elected Biden-Harris, did so with a gender coalition where they, the Biden-Harris ticket, won women by, do you remember how much? Was it by 5, by 10, 12? They actually won women by a whopping 15 points. It was key to the win. So if female turnout surges, if it keeps going up, Harris will have statistically better odds of winning. And in the massive early turnout that I'm telling you about, over 60 million now tonight, we can also see more women are turning out. That's in the early vote. You can see by 10 points, 54% women, 44% men, male. That's the gender gap in the early vote. And there's a lot of early vote. If the share of women stays high and it continues its Democratic lean, that would be bad for Trump. And all the current focus on what I just mentioned, the women's vote and this abortion issue, has put Trump on the defensive over both substance and style. Keep that in mind tonight, because before I bring in our guest, I want to talk to you a little bit about what's happening here. It is about substance and style. We know that his responses, like the way they dealt with the MSG rally, are the kind of closing argument that you'd be better off without. There are plenty of political people we talk to across the board, including conservatives, who say, if that's your closing argument, you'd be better off saying nothing. Now he's sparking terrible headlines about a new round of very blatant sexism at a rally last night, reminding voters of a longer history of documented misogyny. I'm not saying misogyny as an insult, although it is. I'm saying it, quoting the New York Times, as the actual dictionary definition of that kind of hateful, vile treatment and attack and rhetoric against women. It may be an insult, but in this case, it's the New York Times factually saying that the history of misogyny of Donald Trump is back in the headlines. Here, so you can hear it yourself, is what he said at the rally last night.
I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. They said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say, pay these guys a lot of money. Can you believe it? I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
Quote, whether they like it or not. The Washington Post reports that aggressive phrase distills the entire 2024 gender gap. Here is Harris's response today.
His latest comment is just the most recent in a series of examples that we have seen from him in his words and deeds about how he devalues the ability of women to have the choice and the freedom to make decisions about their own body.
That's the vice president, both addressing what he said and linking it back, as I told you, to the substance. The style is the nasty, mean-spirited sort of I control you, whether you like it or not, quote-unquote, misogyny. The substance, the vice president argues in her closing, is actually still about policy and rights and what people are allowed to do in Trump's America. Here's how the View's hosts responded.
When you say whether you like it or not, tells women a lot about who you are.
Yes.
And why they're going to stay away from you.
Yeah.
See, because with you, clearly no doesn't mean no.
Well, no.
Whether you like it or not means I'm going to do it whether you want it or not. That's not the message you want to send women right now.
But I have a question.
I might have an answer.
It's like a technical question.
Okay.
Can you protect women and assault them at the same time?
Right. Right.
That's one question. Many young and first-time voters may not have had the 2016 political coverage front of mind, and we all know how memories fade if you're talking 8 years back, but you see on your screen a memory of an admission, an incriminating statement. Donald Trump's closing, what he said last night, this Political News Cycle is now bringing back his admission on the Access Hollywood tapes, which we can tell you is also now trending anew on TikTok.
Moved on her very heavily. In fact, I took her out furniture shopping. I moved on her like a but I couldn't get there, and she was married. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the
The words on that tape by Donald Trump are the definition of self-incriminating. And since then, a jury has found him liable for sexual abuse against writer E. Jean Carroll, a judge noting that under the legal standard in that civil case, quote, Trump was found to have raped Carroll. That quote you can see, judge clarifies in the Washington Post headline. That's a quote from the presiding judge. In total, 27 women have publicly accused Trump of varying forms of sexual assault, harassment, or misconduct, including the newest one coming forward last week. That is his own conduct. On policy, Trump paved the way for these abortion bans in 21 states. That issue is on the ballot in several states next week. We've told you about that in our coverage. People make up their own mind, but in every state, including red ones that have responded to the end of Roe, Republicans have lost those issues. And as you can see, this includes swing states like Arizona and Nevada, if you're looking at it politically. And Republicans are looking at it politically. When it comes to turnout and the politics, top Republicans view this as a losing issue, as basically the last topic their party wants to close on.
Ohio tonight, we continue the losing streak in the pro-life movement.
Republicans can't keep stumbling and bumbling on abortion.
Republicans need to learn how to talk about abortion.
But until we own this issue as a party, we will lose again and again and again.
Those are just some of the Republican voices. So we're about to turn to our leadoff guest on this, Juanita Tolliver, and we'll hear her response to this. I will just add that when Donald Trump routinely and repeatedly demeans women in public, we hear from Republicans that they say they wish he'd talk about policy, wish he'd get back to policy. But Donald Trump and his now MAGA-fied Republican Party cannot talk to most women about policy right now because their policy was to change 50 years of settled precedent to take away women's fundamental rights. That's the policy conversation in this area if they go back to that, which you'll notice the vice president mentioned in her response. This is the reality for the MAGA Republican Party. And nothing about that is going to change in 5 days, whether they like it or not. Juanita Tolliver, as promised, is here. Welcome. I want to hear your thoughts here. We'll be back together in just 90 seconds.
When you need brutal honesty, when you need answers first thing in the morning, you need your Morning Joe, weekdays at 6, only on MSNBC.
We were wondering if anything happened to us.
We want you to take the kids.
Doesn't count. What you need is a will, something you can sign and make official. Start your will at trustandwill.com and make it count.
When I worked for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, I learned about commitment. Senator Moynihan committed his life to government service. This is what commitment looks like. Building New York's newest train station was Senator Moynihan's idea. It took 30 years and never giving up. When we register to vote, we make a lifetime commitment to democracy, a commitment to vote for all levels of government, working together to build a better America.
It actually is, I think, very offensive to women in terms of not understanding their agency, their authority, their right, and their ability to make decisions about their own lives including their own bodies. And this is just the latest on a series of reveals by the former president of how he thinks about women.
Vice President Harris responding there. We are joined by MSNBC analyst Juanita Tolliver, the author of A More Perfect Party. Your thoughts?
I think that was set up perfectly by you, Ari, as well as the vice president, because what she talked about is the history here. That's explicitly why Trump's advisors on the campaign said, don't say this line, whether women want it or not. Don't say this line about protecting women. It's also why Nikki Haley sent up the red flag to the MAGA bros in the Republican Party saying, hey, women comprise 53% of this country and they vote at higher rates than men. We're watching this play out in real time. And as you were laying out the history of Donald Trump's rhetoric and targeted harm towards women, all I kept hearing in my head was receipts, proof, timeline. It is all there. And this is the closing message that voters, especially women voters, are going to be hearing. I was really appreciative of the data breakdown, too, of that gender divide with the early vote, because Harris has been leading with women by 10 to 15 points for months, Ari, since she got into this race. And it just shows that women wanted a better alternative. Women were ready for this, and women are ready to turn out en masse at the polls.
Yeah, and that goes to the politics. I heard from one operative who said, after all this and all the data and all the smart money, this operative told me recently, if there are enough women who vote to cancel out the men voting for Trump, she will win. We've heard it cut up and diced up in many different ways, but that's how they distilled it. That's the politics. On the substance, you know, in politics, you can have a gaffe, quote unquote, where somebody says something inartfully, sometimes even wrongly. But if it's a standalone sentence, then you weigh it against what they do with their power or their responsibility, and you decide, was it a gaffe, a blunder, a word choice thing, or is it the truth? So what we heard there from the vice president, from the Behar quote and others is, this is not a, quote, gaffe, because it's not about the rhetoric. This is a truth. And I thought it was interesting the way, again, people communicate in different ways. People on TikTok, many women, but not only women, using that sound, and on TikTok you can use a sound effect, and they're not saying more over it. Because what else? Because
nothing else needs to be said.
Go ahead.
Exactly right, Ari. And honestly, when I see the video reactions to the footage, the Access Hollywood footage that was released in the 2016 campaign, I am grateful that young people are getting served this information in a new way across new platforms that will resonate differently in this election cycle. The Harris campaign has been extremely smart about leveraging social media throughout the 3.5 months she's been running. And so this is yet another data point. The other reality, though, when you talk about the context of this statement from Donald Trump, it's almost as though he and Republicans thought that women would just take the L, take their rights being taken away after he appointed 3 anti-choice justices to the Supreme Court with the express intention of overturning decades of precedent in Roe v. Wade, and they thought they would sit back quietly. But Ari, that's not the case, especially when there are weekly reports of women dying after being denied care, especially after we see more and more threats from Republicans about how they can take their anti-abortion policies further, whether that's tracking pregnant people or tracking women's periods, right? Like the threats, the continuous reports about the harm that this is doing in real time to women, all of that takes into consideration what voters are feeling as they enter these polls, as they cast their ballots, as they vote early. And we know that